The Death Harvest. 1905. Long before the era of billion-dollar television deals and polished turf, college football was a blood sport in its purest, most literal form. In 1905, the game didn't just have an injury problem, it had a body count. That season, at least 19 players were killed on the field, with over 137 more suffering life-altering injuries. The primary culprit was the flying wedge, a mass momentum play where players locked arms and charged like a human battering ram. There was no forward pass, no sophisticated strategy, just raw, unbridled collision. Helmets were made of soft leather, often providing less protection than a winter hat, and the concept of player safety simply didn't exist. The headlines of the era, led by the Chicago Tribune, called it a death harvest. The violence became so public and so gruesome, with players dying of brain hemorrhages and crushed ribs in front of thousands, that President Theodore Roosevelt had to step in. He summoned the leaders of Harvard, Yale, and Princeton to the White House with a chilling ultimatum: reform the game, or he would abolish it by executive order. This was the moment the forward pass was born, not out of tactical genius, but out of a desperate, bloody need to stop burying students. It remains the most dangerous year in the history of American sports, a time when the gridiron was a literal graveyard, and the sport's survival depended on its ability to stop killing its participants. The Booster from Hell, Nevin Shapiro. 2011. In the early 2000s, the University of Miami was the bad boy capital of the football world. They had the swagger, the rings, and the U on their helmets. But behind that dominance was a shadow architect named Nevin Shapiro. Shapiro wasn't a coach or an athlete. He was a Ponzi schemer with a $900 million fraud empire and a pathological need for access to the elite world of college sports. For nearly a decade, Shapiro turned the Miami program into his personal playground. He didn't just give improper benefits, he built a parallel, illicit reality for 72 different players. We're talking about high-stakes yacht parties, luxury hotel suites, and $5,000 bounties paid out for injuring rival players from Florida or Florida State. Shapiro even bragged about paying for an abortion for a player's girlfriend to keep a potential scandal from leaking. He wanted to be the king of Miami, and he used the Hurricanes as his court. When his financial house of cards finally collapsed and he was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, he didn't go quietly. From behind bars, he turned whistleblower, burning the program to the ground and revealing a level of corruption the NCAA had never seen. It wasn't just about money, it was about how easily a program's soul can be bought by the highest bidder when the pursuit of swagger replaces the pursuit of integrity. The Punter's Ambush, Mitch Kozad. 2006. In the quiet, specialized world of special teams, the punter is often the safest man on the field, shielded by rules, distance, and the sideline. But at Northern Colorado University, the battle for the starting job didn't end at the whistle. It migrated to the shadows of a campus parking lot. This wasn't a contest of hang time or leg strength. It was a calculated assassination attempt on a teammate's career. Mitch Kozad wasn't looking for a better technique, he was looking for a blade. Mendoza was the obstacle. Kozad was the predator. In the pitch black of a September night, the backup punter traded his cleats for a mask and waited. When Rafael Mendoza approached his car, he wasn't met by a rival athlete, but by a cold-blooded ambush. The strike was surgical and cruel. Kozad targeted Mendoza's kicking leg, the very limb that stood between him and the starting lineup. It was a jagged, desperate attempt to carve a path to the field through bone and muscle. The headlines eventually treated the stabbing punter as a bizarre punchline, but the reality was far more macabre. This wasn't a prank gone wrong, it was a manifestation of the depth chart as a death warrant. It exposed a warped psychological rot where the obsession with being number one outweighed the value of a human life. Kozad traded his jersey for a prison jumpsuit and a conviction for second-degree assault, leaving behind a chilling legacy. A reminder that when the spirit of competition is left to fester in the dark, it doesn't create champions, it creates monsters. The Tower of Negligence. Declan Sullivan. 2010. In the high-stakes machinery of elite college football, the eye in the sky is sacred. The aerial film that captures every movement, every mistake, every secret of the gridiron. But on October 27, 2010, the quest for the perfect angle turned into a death sentence. Declan Sullivan wasn't a linebacker or a star recruit. He was a 20-year-old student videographer at Notre Dame, tasked with filming practice from the precarious heights of a scissor lift. As a brutal South Bend storm rolled in with wind gusts screaming at 50 miles per hour, the line between a routine practice and a fatal gamble dissolved. Sullivan saw the end coming, tweeting that the swaying of his metal perch was terrifying, yet the whistle never blew. The program demanded the footage. The all-22 film study was deemed more vital than the life of the person recording it. Extended 50 feet into a sky that had turned hostile, the lift finally surrendered to the wind, toppling like a felled giant and crushing the life out of Sullivan in an instant. This wasn't an act of God, it was a byproduct of institutional arrogance. The National Weather Service had issued warnings that were ignored, and safety protocols were sacrificed on the altar of convenience and coaching obsession. The aftermath was a damning exposure of a football-first culture where the invisible staff members, the students, the interns, the workers in the shadows, are treated as expendable collateral. It remains a haunting indictment of the coaching hierarchy, a reminder that when a program loses its soul to the pursuit of a perfect season, it isn't just the players who pay the price. Declan Sullivan's death was a tragedy born of pure, cold negligence. A moment where the Golden Dome was tarnished by the realization that, to some, the film was worth more than the filmmaker. The Silent Predator, Todd Hodney. 1978. Long before Jerry Sandusky shattered the legacy of Penn State, there was Todd Hodney. In the late 70s, Hodney was a linebacker for Joe Paterno, a man whose success with honor mantra was the university's cornerstone. But Hodney led a double life. While suited in iconic blue and white on Saturdays, he was hunting women across State College during the week. He wasn't just a criminal, he was a serial predator, described by police as one of the most physically imposing and dangerous men ever tracked. He committed a string of brutal sexual assaults, targeting students and local mothers alike. The most haunting part is the lost decades, the way the program moved past his arrest and expulsion without ever addressing the darkness he left behind. For 40 years, his story remained a footnote, buried by the weight of national championships and Paterno's mounting legend. When the Sandusky scandal broke in 2011, it became clear the culture of silence wasn't a new phenomenon. It was a tradition of protection cultivated for 40 years, starting with a man who barely made an impact on the field, but left a trail of victims in the shadows. The heat stroke tragedy, Jordan McNair. 2018. In the world of elite football, toughness is often measured by the pain a player can endure. At the University of Maryland, that philosophy became lethal. During an outdoor session in the stifling May heat, 19-year-old Jordan McNair collapsed after a series of 110-yard sprints. As McNair's body temperature soared to a fatal 106 degrees, the coaching staff failed to act with the necessary urgency. There was no cold water immersion, the gold standard for heat stroke that should be at every practice. Instead, his organs failed under the heat, and he died 2 weeks later. The investigation revealed a toxic culture led by head coach DJ Durkin, where players were belittled for distress and mental toughness was prioritized over medical reality. McNair didn't die from a freak accident. He died because the people paid to protect him were more interested in breaking him than keeping him alive. It remains a watershed moment for player safety, a chilling proof that old-school grit is a death sentence when negligence masquerades as discipline. The Honor Code Crisis, West Point. 1951. In the hallowed halls of West Point, leadership is forged on a single, unbreakable command: the Honor Code. A cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal. But in 1951, that moral bedrock didn't just crack, it disintegrated under the weight of a football program obsessed with winning. That season, the academy didn't just lose games, it lost its soul. 90 cadets were purged in a massive cheating scandal, with nearly 40 of them being the very stars who wore the varsity gold. This wasn't a clerical error, it was a systematic conspiracy. Players were trafficking exam answers like contraband, treating the classroom as a hurdle to be cleared by any means necessary to stay on the field. The fallout was a nuclear event for the American military. At a time when legends like Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis had made Army a national powerhouse, the scandal exposed a rot at the core of the nation's future officers. It wasn't just about grades. It was about the integrity of the men destined to lead in combat. The pursuit of gridiron glory had become a villain that corrupted the Academy's sacred mission, triggering a congressional inquiry that put the entire sport on trial. The 1951 team withered to a 2-7 record as the roster was gutted, but the true cost was a permanent scar on the long gray line. It remains a chilling reminder. When a game is allowed to become too big to fail, even the most honorable institutions will trade their conscience for a scoreboard. The invisible injury, Tyler Hilinski. 2018, Tyler Hilinski was the charismatic face of Washington State football, a talented quarterback with his entire life ahead of him. But in January 2018, that life ended by his own hand in a quiet Pullman apartment. There were no warning signs, no audible cries for help. It wasn't until the autopsy that the devastating truth emerged. At just 21 years old, Hilinski possessed the brain of a 65-year-old suffering from stage 1 CT. The primary culprit wasn't a single bone-jarring hit, but the thousands of routine subconcussive collisions that had physically eroded his mind's chemistry. This was a biological war disguised as a game. His death reframed the invisible cost of the gridiron, proving that the hits we don't see are often the most lethal. Through Hilinski's hope, his legacy remains a haunting reminder that players are often fighting internal battles they don't understand. It is a grim testament to the reality that, for some, the price of the sport isn't just a temporary injury. It is the slow, silent destruction of the self. The sideline assault. Woody Hayes. 1978. The Gator Bowl detonation. 1978. In the era of the God Coach, Woody Hayes was more than a leader. He was an untouchable institution. With 5 national titles and 28 years of dominance, he commanded more power in Columbus than any politician. But Hayes was a man governed by a volatile, unbridled temper, a ticking time bomb that finally detonated on national television. The trigger was a late-game interception by Clemson's Charlie Bauman, a play that effectively signaled the end of Ohio State's season and the fracturing of Hayes' composure. As Bauman was run out of bounds near the Ohio State sideline, the frustration of a fading legacy boiled over into a moment of literal madness. The 65-year-old legend lunged and punched the young athlete in the throat in front of a stunned national audience. It wasn't just a physical assault, it was the public suicide of a legendary career. By the following morning, the God Coach was gone. Hayes was fired, ending his tenure not with a trophy, but with a disgrace that would define his name forever. The punch signaled the death of an era where wins provided total immunity, proving that no amount of gold can insulate a man from his own internal rot when it is unleashed on a public stage. The Mid-Flight Massacre, Marshall University, 1970. November 14, 1970 remains the darkest entry in the ledger of American sports. Marshall University's football team was returning from a tough loss at East Carolina, but they would never make it home. Onboard Southern Airways Flight 932 were 75 souls, players, coaches, and the town's most prominent boosters. As the plane descended through a suffocating, rainy fog toward the Tri-State Airport, it clipped a stand of trees just short of the runway and slammed into a hillside. The impact was cataclysmic. There were no survivors. In a single violent instant, an entire community's heart was ripped out. Huntington wasn't a big city, it was a town where everyone knew the players, and overnight, dozens of children were transformed into orphans. The body count was so total that the administration considered burying the program forever. The grief was paralyzing, a weight that threatened to sink the entire university. Yet, from the wreckage rose the young thundering herd, a team of walk-ons and freshmen forced to play through the trauma. The Marshall crash serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of life, proving that while a plane can wipe a program off the map, a community's spirit is much harder to kill. The betrayal of Lizzie Seberg, Notre Dame. 2010. While the 2010 headlines at Notre Dame were gripped by the death of Declan Sullivan, a quieter, equally devastating tragedy was festering in the shadows. Elizabeth Lizzie Seberg was a 19-year-old student who reported a sexual assault by a high-profile football player. What followed was a masterclass in institutional coldness. Instead of sanctuary, Seberg was met with a campaign of psychological warfare. Threatening messages from the locker room flooded her phone, warning that her life would be over if she dared to challenge the program. Don't do anything you would regret. For Seberg, the pressure became a literal death sentence. 10 days after her report, overwhelmed by a system stacked against her, she took her own life. The investigation into the assault didn't even begin in earnest until she was in the ground, and no charges were ever filed. The university stood accused of prioritizing the protection of its stars over the survival of its students. It remains a stinging indictment of an athlete-first justice system, a story of a victim silenced by a culture that viewed her as nothing more than a threat to the Saturday afternoon scoreboard. The Charlottesville Ambush, UVA, 2022. The Enemy Within, 2022. On a cold November night in 2022, the University of Virginia was reminded that the violence of the world can penetrate even the closest-knit brotherhoods. A charter bus was returning to campus after a class field trip to Washington, D.C. On that bus were the lifeblood of the UVA program, young men like Laval Davis Jr., Devin Chandler, and Deshaun Perry. But as the vehicle pulled into the sanctuary of a campus parking garage, the brotherhood was shattered by a hail of gunfire. The primary culprit wasn't an outside intruder, but a fellow student and former teammate who turned the bus into a kill zone. 3 lives were snuffed out in seconds. 2 others were left bleeding. For 12 agonizing hours, Charlottesville was plunged into a terrifying lockdown as a manhunt gripped the city. The evidence left behind was a trail of missed warning signs. The shooter had been on the university's radar for months, flagged for behavioral red flags and weapon possession that were never neutralized. It wasn't just a random act, it was a systemic failure of intervention. The tragedy left a program shattered and a season canceled, forcing the sporting world to confront a chilling reality. Sometimes, the most lethal danger isn't the opponent on the field, but the predator within the home. The Shrek Rituals, Northwestern's Systemic Rot. 2023. In the world of elite athletics, tradition is the shield used to hide a sophisticated system of degradation. At Northwestern University, the locker room, meant to be a sanctuary of brotherhood, was transformed into a dark chamber of anxiety and ritualized abuse. This wasn't just a few rogue athletes, it was a culture of sanctioned humiliation. Freshmen were subjected to the run, a harrowing ritual where they were forced into a lightless room to be shucked by upperclassmen in masks. Even more visceral were the Shrek Rituals, a name used to sanitize acts of sexual humiliation and psychological trauma. The villain in this story was the system itself. If a player failed on the field, his name was marked on a locker room whiteboard, a public death warrant for his dignity. He knew what was coming. When the 17-year tenure of head coach Pat Fitzgerald finally detonated in a national scandal, it exposed the coaching industrial complex and the unbridled power given to those at the top. The Northwestern disaster wasn't just a failure of leadership, it was a criminal indictment of toughening up gone wrong. It proved that even in a program built on smart football, the hunger for victory creates a vacuum where morality is the first sacrifice on the altar of the scoreboard. The Minnesota Mutiny, Loyalty versus Justice. 2016. In 2016, the University of Minnesota Gophers provided a chilling case study in how team chemistry can be weaponized to obstruct justice. When 10 players were suspended following a sexual assault investigation, the entire roster did the unthinkable. They went on strike. Standing shoulder to shoulder in their jerseys for a televised press conference, they claimed their brothers were victims of a broken system. This wasn't a protest, it was a high-stakes power play. By threatening to boycott the Holiday Bowl, the team held the university's multi-million-dollar revenue and national reputation hostage to protect their own. For 48 hours, the narrative was a battle of due process versus bureaucracy. The players were framed as heroes by those who bought into the locker room code. But the villain wasn't the administration. It was the truth buried in an 82-page internal report. When the document leaked, it detailed a level of depravity that turned the public's stomach. It described a victim physically overwhelmed and mocked, subjected to a group assault that the participants had the audacity to film. The graphic reality of the evidence, bolstered by the players' own footage, caused the mutiny to evaporate overnight. The support vanished, leaving behind a literal wreck of a reputation. The players returned to practice, but the stain was permanent. It exposed a fundamental rot in the modern athlete's psyche, the dangerous belief that blind loyalty and the bond of the brotherhood stand above the laws of the land. It remains a haunting reminder that in the hunt for a bowl ring, empathy is often the first thing discarded to protect the roster. The SMU Death Penalty. 1987. While many scandals explode in a single moment of violence, the Southern Methodist University disaster of the 1980s was the slow-motion suicide of an entire program. It remains the only time in history the NCAA executed a major football powerhouse, delivering the dreaded death penalty. In the early 80s, SMU was a titan of the turf, propelled by the Pony Express backfield of Eric Dickerson and Craig James. They were the undisputed kings of the Southwest Conference, but their throne was built on a foundation of systemic bribery and institutionalized rot. The primary culprit was a sophisticated slush fund, a secret payroll sanctioned by high-ranking officials that turned amateur athletes into salaried employees. This wasn't a collection of rogue handshakes. It was a professional financial operation. When the NCAA investigators first came knocking, the program didn't flinch. They lied with a sense of total invincibility. The arrogance was absolute. The boosters and board members believed the program was too wealthy and too influential to be dismantled. But in 1987, the NCAA finally pulled the plug. The death penalty didn't just penalize the team, it erased them, canceling the entire 1987 season and stripping away their future. The program didn't just stumble, it vanished, becoming a literal ghost of its former self for decades to come. It stands as the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when a financial win-at-all-costs culture devours the mission of a university. The Pony Express didn't just run out of gas, it was put down by the very system it tried to outrun. The Baylor Horror. 2016. In the heart of Texas, Art Briles transformed Baylor University into a national powerhouse, fueled by an explosive offense that seemed unstoppable. But behind the record-breaking scores was a terrifying body count of a different kind. Under the glory of the gridiron, the football program had become a law unto itself, a literal sanctuary for predators. This wasn't just a failure of oversight, it was a systematic operation to suppress, ignore, and bury a string of sexual assaults committed by the very players the fans cheered for on Saturdays. The villain was a culture that viewed women as collateral damage in the pursuit of a Big 12 championship. Victims who dared to speak were met with a wall of silence, their reports vanishing into a bureaucratic void by an athletic department more interested in protecting the roster than the student body. When the corruption finally detonated, it triggered a total purge of the university leadership and the firing of Briles. But for the survivors, the resolution brought no peace. It remains a staggering indictment of win-at-all-costs recruiting, a reminder that when a program is allowed to operate in the shadows, the scoreboard becomes a shield for the most heinous crimes imaginable. The ledger of the game. We watch college football for the heroics. We watch for the last-second touchdowns and the underdog stories that make us believe in the impossible. But as we've seen, the cost of that entertainment is often written in blood, silence, and broken lives. From the frozen fields of West Point to the humid practice dirt of Maryland, the dark side of the game is always there, lurking just beyond the camera's lens. It is a world where institutional protection is a reflex and human safety is an afterthought. We remember the names on the back of the jerseys, but we must also remember the names of the victims. Declan Sullivan, Jordan McNair, Lizzie Seberg, and the countless others whose stories were buried to keep the brand alive. The scoreboard tells us who won the game, but the stories we've told today tell us something much more important. They tell us what we've lost. The next time you hear the roar of a Saturday crowd, ask yourself, what is the true price of the game? And more importantly, Who is the one paying it? If you want to see the stories they try to keep in the shadows, subscribe and hit the bell. We aren't finished looking behind the curtain. Thanks for watching.